The rain hammered against the asphalt, but it couldn't drown out the sound of crunching glass. Officer Derek Vance grinned as he lifted his heavy boot and ground it firmly into the screen of a cracked smartphone, shattering the last remnant of the woman's connection to the outside world. "Look at you," Vance sneered, his voice dripping with venomous disdain as he grabbed Maya Sterling by the collar and slammed her face first into the cold, wet hood of her car. "You really thought you could just cruise through Silver Creek like you owned the place? I don't care how high and mighty you think you are. Out here, a black woman in a hoodie is nothing more than a target." He leaned in closer, his breath reeking of stale coffee. "What's the matter, sweetheart? Cat got your tongue? Or are you just realizing that nobody comes looking for someone like you?" He chuckled darkly, his eyes raking over her frame with pure, unadulterated contempt. "Maybe if you'd stayed in your lane instead of acting like you had somewhere important to be, you wouldn't be crying in the mud right now." He didn't know he had just crossed the line with the one person who held the power to destroy his entire world. Are you ready to see how this story ends? Let us know in the comments. What city and time zone are you watching from? And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the conclusion to this intense journey. 40 minutes earlier, the evening air in the capital had been thick with the humidity of a lingering July summer. Governor Maya Sterling had been running on fumes, her mind cluttered with the crushing weight of a state budget crisis and the lingering exhaustion of a grueling legislative week. But everything had screeched to a halt when her sister's frantic call shattered the relative calm of her office. Her nephew had been rushed to the emergency room in the outskirts of the county, and the bureaucratic delays of a formal security detail, the black SUVs, the lead cars, the press scouts would have made her late. Maya, ever the pragmatist, had chosen the quiet route. She had borrowed her niece's 2014 Honda Civic, a beige, unassuming vehicle that blended into the highway traffic like a drop of water in the ocean. She had pulled her signature Georgetown hoodie low over her forehead, ditching the tailored blazers and the high-profile accessories that usually signaled her status. For the first time in years, she felt like just another citizen on the road, a simple woman driving to see family. The anonymity felt intoxicating, almost liberating, until she crossed the invisible border into Silver Creek. Silver Creek was a town built on old money and older prejudices. Its architecture was a postcard of colonial elegance, impeccably manicured lawns, pristine white fences, and streets so quiet they felt staged. Yet for those who didn't fit the mold of its wealthy inhabitants, the town was a gilded cage. Maya steered the Honda onto the main thoroughfare, her eyes scanning the surroundings. It was a scorching afternoon, yet the strangeness of the town was immediately apparent. As she passed the sidewalk, she felt a prickle of discomfort on the back of her neck. Every pedestrian she passed was dressed in an inexplicable ensemble of heavy wool coats, thick scarves, and even beanies, despite the blistering sun baking the pavement. It was as if they were collectively preparing for a blizzard that had no intention of arriving. Maya frowned, shaking her head, dismissing it as some bizarre local custom she was unaware of. She kept her hands steady on the steering wheel, focused solely on the hospital GPS. Unbeknownst to her, she had already been flagged. A few hundred yards back, Officer Derek Vance was idling in his patrol car near the town's entrance, a stretch of road known locally as the Gatekeeper's Pass. Vance was a man who took pride in the town's reputation. He didn't just patrol the streets, he curated them. He liked things predictable, orderly, and entirely homogeneous. When the beige Honda crawled past his line of sight, something about it sparked an immediate aggressive irritation. It wasn't the car, it was the silhouette in the driver's seat. He pulled out into traffic, his eyes locked onto the rear license plate. He didn't see a human being. He saw a disruption. He saw a variable he couldn't control. With the practiced ease of a predator, he accelerated, the heavy thrum of his engine echoing through the quiet streets. Maya caught the flashing lights in her rearview mirror almost instantly. Her stomach dropped. She wasn't just a governor. She was a woman who knew the statistics, a former lawyer who had spent her career dismantling systems that treated citizens like prey. She eased the car toward the curb, the gravel crunching beneath her tires, as she brought the vehicle to a halt under a weeping willow tree. Her heart hammered against her ribs, not out of guilt, but out of an acute awareness of the precariousness of her position. She grabbed her license, her hands steady despite the adrenaline. She waited. She watched in the mirror as Vance stepped out of his car, his posture radiating a calculated, aggressive dominance. He didn't approach the window. He stood back, hand hovering near his holster, his eyes scanning the interior of her car with a chilling, clinical detachment. The air outside felt suddenly vacuum-sealed, the heat of the day intensifying. Maya rolled down her window, her expression composed, her voice prepared to address the officer with the same dignity she would accord a colleague in the State House. But as the car door opened, she realized that this wasn't going to be a conversation. It was going to be an encounter she would never forget. Derek Vance didn't walk. He stomped. Each step was a deliberate display of territory marking. As he approached the driver's side, he didn't offer the standard, "Good evening, ma'am." Instead, he remained in the blind spot of the side mirror, a tactical move designed to force the driver to turn their head and reveal their profile. Maya complied, maintaining her composure, her eyes locked forward. She knew the protocol. She knew the dance. "License and registration." Vance barked, his voice sharp enough to cut the heavy summer air. He didn't wait for her to offer them. He kept his right hand hovering inches from the grip of his service weapon, a gesture that was not about safety, it was about signaling a threat. Maya reached into her console, her movements measured. "Officer, is there a problem? I was just passing through toward the hospital." "I don't remember asking for your life story," Vance snapped, finally stepping into her field of vision. He shone his flashlight, a massive military-grade beam, directly into her eyes, blinding her. It was a classic intimidation tactic designed to disorient and provoke a defensive response. Maya squinted, her jaw tightening, but she didn't flinch. "I'm merely informing you of my destination," she replied, her tone dipping into the resonant, authoritative baritone she reserved for the state Senate floor. Vance's eyes narrowed. He didn't like the cadence of her voice. It wasn't the voice of a supplicant. It was the voice of a superior. "That's a nice tone you've got there. You think that works on everyone?" He tapped his heavy plastic traffic baton against the driver's side door, a rhythmic, metallic thud, thud, thud that echoed through the quiet street. It was a jarring, abrasive sound, like nails on a chalkboard, clearly meant to rattle her nerves. "Sir, I am asking you to stop tapping on my vehicle," Maya said, her eyes flashing with a cold, intellectual fire. "And I'm telling you to stay silent until I say otherwise." Vance stepped even closer, leaning his forearm on the frame of her door, invading her personal space so aggressively that the scent of his stale coffee and cheap menthol cigarettes flooded the interior of the car. "You know, we've had a string of property crimes in Silver Creek lately. A lot of folks matching your description, lanky, hooded, acting like they have something to hide, creeping around the ridge houses at night." The accusation hung in the air, thick and foul. Maya felt the sting of it, but she pushed it aside, her lawyer's mind already cataloging the civil rights violations. "I have no interest in anyone's property, officer. I am a citizen with the right to travel. If there is a legitimate reason for this stop, please state it. Otherwise, I will be on my way." "You have the right to travel." Vance let out a dry, hacking laugh. "You have the right to answer my questions. And right now the question is, what are you doing in a car that clearly doesn't belong to you? This bucket looks like it was fished out of a junkyard." "The vehicle is registered to my family. Everything is in order," Maya said, her voice remaining steady. She began to reach toward the glove box to retrieve the documents. "Don't!" Vance yelled, his hand slamming onto the doorframe, with enough force to make the car vibrate. The sudden violence of the move made Maya gasp. "I told you to keep your hands where I can see them. I don't know what you're reaching for, and in this town, we don't take chances with people who look like trouble." The trouble was coded a transparent shield for his bias. Maya kept her hands on the steering wheel, her knuckles white. She looked at his badge, memorizing the serial number. "Officer, I am complying. I am simply trying to provide the proof you asked for." "I'm done listening to the excuses." Vance hissed, his face now mere inches from hers. He looked at her with a mix of genuine malice and sadistic glee. "You're agitated. You're evasive. You're a risk to the public safety of Silver Creek." He stepped back and ripped the door open. "Get out of the car. Now." Maya felt the surge of adrenaline, but she forced it into a deep, calm reservoir. She stepped out, her feet hitting the pavement. She stood tall, her posture radiating an innate elegance that clearly infuriated him further. He didn't see a woman who was tired and worried about her nephew. He saw an obstacle that needed to be crushed. "Turn around," he ordered, grabbing his handcuffs. "On what charge?" Maya asked, her voice crystal clear. "Obstruction of justice and suspicious behavior." Vance spat, his eyes gleaming. "And honestly, I don't like your attitude. That's charge enough for tonight." Maya felt the coarse, biting metal of the handcuffs against her skin. She didn't struggle. To struggle would be to play into the narrative Vance was so desperate to construct. Instead, she stood perfectly still, a statue of quiet defiance, as he wrenched her arms behind her back with unnecessary force. The handcuffs clicked into place with a sharp finality that echoed in the deathly quiet street. "You're making a catastrophic mistake," Maya said, her voice devoid of the tremor Vance was likely hoping for. She wasn't just speaking as a woman being harassed. She was speaking as the highest authority in the state. "If you would just run my credentials, you would see that I am not who you think I am. You are detaining a state official, and the repercussions for this will be absolute." Vance laughed, a low, guttural sound that lacked any trace of amusement. He pushed her forward, his hand clamped firmly on the back of her neck, forcing her to stumble toward the hood of the car. "A state official. That's a good one. Maybe you think you're the Queen of England, too. Look at you wearing a hoodie that's seen better days, driving a rust bucket, and claiming you hold office." He shoved her face first into the cold metal of the Honda's hood. "The only office you're going to be holding tonight is the holding cell at the precinct." He leaned down, his face pressed close to her ear, his voice dropping to a whisper that was meant to be purely wounding. "Do you know what we do with people like you in Silver Creek? We take out the trash, and you, sweetheart, are nothing but a stain on this pavement." The humiliation was designed to be suffocating. Maya felt the rough texture of the car's paint against her cheek, the heat of the summer sun still radiating from the metal. She felt the weight of his body pressing against her back, keeping her pinned, ensuring she felt every ounce of his perceived superiority. Every word he spoke was a deliberate attempt to peel away her dignity, to reduce her to the caricature he had built in his warped mind. "I've seen your kind before." Vance continued, his voice rising again, as he felt emboldened by her silence. "You think you can play the victim cry bias whenever someone with a badge asks you a simple question. But here, the only thing that matters is the law. And the law says you're a liability." He took a step back, but only to grab her by the arm and pull her away from the car, dragging her toward his patrol unit. Maya's feet scuffed against the gravel, her balance constantly off-center. Every step was a battle to maintain her equilibrium. She looked toward the nearby houses, the pristine, silent homes with their manicured lawns and heavy curtains, hoping for a witness, a sign of humanity. But there was nothing. The town seemed to be holding its breath, indifferent to the scene unfolding on the asphalt. "Officer, I am asking you to reconsider." Maya said again, her voice straining under the discomfort of the cuffs. If you take me in, you are ending your own career. My security detail will be tracking my location. They are already aware that I am being detained. Please just check the identification in my purse. Vance stopped dead. He pulled her around to face him, his eyes narrowed into slits of pure malice. My career. You're threatening me, you think, because you've got some big-shot friends you can throw your weight around. He leaned in his face, inches from hers. You're in my town and you play by my rules. And my rules say that when I see a black woman in a hoodie acting out, I put her in her place. He reached out and snatched the small leather purse from the passenger seat, dumping its contents onto the gravel. Credit cards, lip gloss, and a few loose dollar bills scattered into the dirt. He kicked them aside, searching for something, anything, that would prove he was right. He wanted to find something illicit, something that would turn her from a suspicious person into a criminal. But all he found was a stack of official-looking stationery and a smartphone. He picked up the phone. It was locked, but the screen glowed with a single, persistent notification. Vanguard status update requested. What is this? He demanded, shoving the phone into her face. Some kind of encrypted burner. Who are you working for? I work for the people of this state, Maya replied, her eyes locked onto his unblinking. And you are currently in violation of multiple statutes, officer. The moment those doors close, you are not just a man in a uniform. You are a liability to the law. Vance's face darkened, his jaw clenching so hard, a muscle pulsed in his temple. He didn't want to hear her logic. It threatened the fragile structure of his authority. He grabbed her by the shoulder and slammed her into the back seat of the patrol car. The door slammed shut with a metallic final ring entombing her in the claustrophobic space. It smelled of industrial cleaner and stale sweat. As he walked back to his driver's side door, he glanced at the phone one last time, his thumb hovering over the screen, tempted to smash it. He was a man who felt the ground shifting beneath him, though he refused to acknowledge it. He had committed to this path, and in his mind there was no turning back. The interior of the patrol car was a vacuum of silence, broken only by the rhythmic, taunting patter of rain that had finally begun to fall, washing away the summer heat. Maya sat perfectly upright in the hard plastic cage, her wrists throbbing in protest against the biting steel of the cuffs. She felt the cold seep through her hoodie, a sharp contrast to the burning indignation that radiated from her chest. But more than the physical pain, it was the calculated, systematic erasure of her personhood that stung. Outside, Derek Vance was a man possessed by his own power. He didn't just lock her away. He transformed the arrest into a performance. He didn't move to start the engine or drive to the precinct. Instead, he leaned against the trunk of his cruiser, his arms crossed, watching her through the wire mesh with a gaze of sadistic satisfaction. He pulled out his own phone, tapped at the screen, and then stood there for what felt like an eternity, scrolling through messages, occasionally chuckling to himself. Maya watched him, her eyes tracking his every move. She saw him look over at a passing civilian sedan, a neighbor perhaps curious about the flashing lights, and saw him exaggerate his posture, leaning back, puffing out his chest, as if he had just apprehended a dangerous fugitive rather than a woman who had dared to drive a beige Honda. He was building his narrative, creating a fiction of heroism in the face of imaginary peril. Then the performance took a turn for the grotesque. Vance reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, his face lighting up with a cruel inspiration. He walked around to the passenger side of the cruiser, opened the door, and leaned in, his phone held out like a camera. "Smile, sweetheart," he jeered, his eyes sparkling with malice. "Everyone back at the station is going to love this one. They'll finally see how we handle these so-called high-profile troublemakers in Silver Creek." He began to snap photos, his flash firing in the darkness, a blinding white strobe that left spots dancing in Maya's vision. He was capturing her at her most vulnerable, turning her forced captivity into content for his internal ego. He moved the camera angle, laughing, as he framed her face, her cuffed hands, her rumpled hoodie. "Oh, this is going to be the talk of the precinct," he muttered mostly to himself, his voice thick with the intoxicating poison of his authority. "Wait until they see the face of the governor or whatever delusions you're peddling tonight. You're going to be a laughingstock by morning." He lingered for a full 15 minutes, forcing her to endure the glare of his phone, the mockery of his commentary, and the sheer dehumanizing weight of his presence. He treated her not as a detainee, but as a trophy, a tangible manifestation of his power to humble the proud. He wanted her to beg, to plead, to show some crack in her armor, but Maya remained still. She focused on her breathing, on the rhythmic ticking of the patrol car's clock, on the precise memory of his badge number, Vance D4492. She recorded every insult, every flash of the camera, every moment of the ordeal. She was a lawyer. She knew that every piece of evidence of his cruelty was a nail in the coffin of his career. Finally, he slammed the door shut, leaving her in the stifling dark. He strolled back to the front of the cruiser, pulled out his radio, and keyed the mic. His tone was professional, a jarring fake veneer of procedural competence. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. I have the subject in custody. Transportation to the precinct is currently underway. I've encountered significant resistance, so expect a full report on the booking." He was lying brazenly, effortlessly. Maya heard the dispatcher's voice, a bored, weary woman, respond with a clipped, "Copy Unit 4. Processing is ready for your arrival." Vance chuckled to himself, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. The car roared to life, the vibrations rattling the cage against Maya's spine. He didn't drive toward the station. He took the long way, circling the quiet, affluent streets, making sure to hit every speed bump with a violent jolt that sent sharp stabs of pain through her bruised wrists. He was enjoying the ride, his fingers tapping a rhythmic beat against the steering wheel, his head bobbing slightly to the music playing over the precinct radio. In the back, Maya felt the shift. Her own wrist, hidden by the sleeves of her hoodie, remained pressed against the small of her back. Her thumb, dexterous and steady, found the hidden biometric sensor on the encrypted smartphone Vance had tossed onto the passenger seat earlier. It was still there, glowing faintly. She had left her watch face pressed against the sensor, the emergency signal she had triggered earlier, a steady, pulsing crimson pulse. She knew the protocol. She knew that even now, in the depths of his arrogance, Vance had no idea he was driving into the belly of the beast. He was the one who was trapped. He just hadn't realized it yet. He was playing a game of catch and release, but he had mistakenly captured a shark. As they turned onto the road leading to the municipal headquarters, the headlights of the cruiser caught the reflection of a sign. "Silver Creek, where order is law." Maya stared at the words, her expression cold, her eyes burning with a resolve that transcended the physical pain. "Enjoy the view, officer," she whispered to the back of his head, her voice barely audible over the hum of the tires. "Because it's the last time you'll ever see it as a free man." Vance didn't hear her. He was too busy whistling, entirely consumed by the intoxicating, fragile illusion that he was the apex predator of Silver Creek. The air inside the cruiser felt heavy, charged with a static electricity that seemed to vibrate through the plastic partition. Vance was still whistling a jaunty, discordant tune that mocked the gravity of the situation. He was weaving through the winding roads of the ridge, taking the scenic route to the precinct, seemingly intent on savoring every minute of his perceived victory. He checked his rearview mirror, catching Maya's gaze, and offered a smug, toothy grin. "You're quiet back there," he remarked, his voice dripping with condescension. "Usually the ones who talk as big as you do start singing a different tune once they realize the bars are real. What's wrong? Thinking about your pension, or maybe just realizing you're in over your head?" Maya didn't answer. She kept her eyes fixed on the back of his head, her mind calculating the distance remaining. She knew the coordinates. She knew that the emergency distress beacon she had triggered on her encrypted device wasn't just a silent alert. It was a high-frequency homing signal that was currently painting their position with the precision of a laser. Suddenly, the monotonous drone of the precinct radio was cut off by a jarring, high-pitched screech of static. Vance frowned, reaching out to adjust the dial. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4, say again, you're breaking up." Silence. Only the faint, ghostly hiss of an open channel filled the cruiser. "Dispatch." Vance tried again, his voice losing its cocky edge. He tapped the mic on his shoulder. "Dispatch, come in." "Unit 4, maintain your current position," a voice boomed back. It wasn't the bored dispatcher. It was a cold, unfamiliar voice, staccato, clinical, and terrifyingly precise. "Do not, I repeat, do not enter the perimeter of the precinct. You are to rendezvous with intercept units at your current coordinates. Confirm." Vance's hand froze on the mic. The blood drained from his face, leaving his complexion a sallow, sickly gray. He blinked, the confusion warring with a budding primal terror. "Who is this? This is Officer Vance. I'm conducting a transport. I don't recognize your frequency." "Officer Vance," the voice responded, and this time the recognition of his name struck him like a physical blow. "This is State Executive Command. You are speaking with Special Agent Marcus Thorne. You have 30 seconds to pull over and exit your vehicle with your hands behind your head. If you fail to comply, you will be deemed a hostile threat to the office of the governor." The name hit Vance like a thunderclap. Governor. The word seemed to scramble the circuits of his brain. He slammed his foot on the brake, the tires skidding and screeching against the wet pavement as the cruiser fish-tanked to a halt in the middle of the empty ridge road. "Governor," he whispered, the sound cracking in his throat. He looked at the rearview mirror, his hands trembling violently on the wheel. Maya sat there, completely serene. Her eyes locked onto his, a look of profound, chilling pity on her face. "I told you," she said, her voice soft, but carrying the weight of an anvil. "You were just too arrogant to listen." Vance stared at her, his bravado dissolving into a puddle of panic. He fumbled for his mic, his fingers slick with sweat. "Dispatch, Brenda, talk to me." "What the hell is going on? Is this a joke? Tommy, pull over!" The dispatcher's voice finally came through, but it was frantic, breathless, and soaked in pure, unadulterated fear. "Tommy, listen to me. I don't know what you did, but the state police have locked us out of the mainframe. The Attorney General's office is on the override channel. They're demanding to know if the governor is safe." "What did you do?" Vance dropped the radio mic. It swung from his shoulder, hitting the center console with a dull thud. He looked out the windshield, and his breath hitched. Headlights. Dozens of them. They weren't coming from the direction of the precinct. They were emerging from the woods, from the side roads, from the very darkness he had thought he commanded. High-performance matte black SUVs were executing a perfect tactical box, their high beams creating a blinding, impenetrable wall of light that made the cruiser look like a bug trapped in a lantern. "Unit 4, step out of the vehicle." The command echoed through a megaphone, the sound booming with the force of a tectonic shift. Vance's heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He stared at his sidearm, his hand hovering over the holster, a reflex born of decades of ingrained training. But then he looked at the wall of tactical lights, the silhouettes of men in black vests emerging from the shadows, their weapons raised in a low-ready professional stance. These weren't local patrol cops. These were the elite of the elite. He didn't move. He couldn't. His legs felt like lead weights. He looked back at Maya one last time. She was looking at the dashboard, her expression unreadable, waiting. "You did this." He gasped, his voice a pathetic, trembling shell. You knew this was coming." Maya didn't say a word. She just watched as the lead SUV, a reinforced, bulletproof beast of a vehicle, crunched over the curb and slammed to a halt just inches from the front bumper of the cruiser, pinning it in place. The doors flew open in a perfectly synchronized movement. 6 men faces, obscured by tactical masks, swarmed the vehicle. The passenger door of the cruiser was ripped open, not by Vance, but by a hand that felt like a steel claw. "Officer Vance," a voice commanded, cool and lethal. It was Agent Marcus Thorne. He didn't look at the officer. His eyes were scanning the back seat, his face softening only when they locked onto Maya. "Step out. Hands behind your head. Now." Vance scrambled out his knees, buckling as he hit the wet asphalt. He felt the cold touch of a barrel against his neck before he even had a chance to stand. He was shoved face first into the mud, his badge, the very shield he had used to terrorize the innocent, ripped from his chest with a violent final snap. "You're under arrest, Vance," Thorne said, his voice dropping to a register that made the officer's skin crawl. "And you have no idea the hell you've just invited into your life." The rain had intensified, transforming the ridge road into a chaotic scene of blinding lights and shimmering puddles. Derek Vance lay face down in the freezing mud, his breath hitching in ragged, desperate gasps. He was surrounded. 3 blacked-out SUVs had created an ironclad barricade, their high-intensity LED light bars flickering in a hypnotic, disorienting rhythm that turned the night into an unforgiving stage. Special Agent Marcus Thorne, a man whose presence commanded immediate instinctive obedience, didn't spare a second glance at the disgraced officer. He moved with the precision of a predator, his tactical boots splashing through the dark water as he strode to the rear door of the cruiser. With a powerful tug, he ripped the door open. Maya Sterling sat there, her silhouette framed by the harsh, pulsating lights of the tactical perimeter. Despite the ordeal, she was a statue of composure. Her wrists were still secured tightly behind her back, the metal biting into her skin, but her chin was held high, her eyes scanning the scene with the cold, diagnostic gaze of a seasoned prosecutor. "Governor," Thorne said, his voice dropping from a tactical bark to a tone of profound, urgent deference. He reached for his belt, his hand flying to the heavy-duty key ring attached to his tactical vest. "Are you injured, ma'am? We have the medical team on standby at the primary intercept unit." "I am fine, Marcus," Maya replied, her voice steady, ringing clearly over the roar of the rain and the distant rumble of the approaching state police convoy. "But I am not ready for the handcuffs to come off." Thorne paused, his hand hovering over her wrists. He looked at her, his expression a mixture of confusion and disciplined concern. "Ma'am, the bruising is already visible. We need to get you stabilized." "You heard me, Agent," she said, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. She shifted her body, pivoting her feet out of the cruiser and onto the mud-slicked asphalt. She stood up, her frame perfectly vertical, despite the forced, unnatural posture of her arms. "I want to walk into the Capitol just like this. Every scratch, every welt, every moment of this humiliation stays exactly as it is until I reach the State House podium." Thorne stared at her for a heartbeat, then slowly stood up, his face hardening into an expression of granite-like resolve. He realized immediately what she was doing. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was an architect of justice. "Understood, Governor. My men will form the perimeter." While this exchange unfolded, the scene around the cruiser was one of pure, unadulterated collapse for the Silver Creek police. 2 troopers had hauled Vance to his feet. His uniform soaked his face, a mask of primal, shaking terror. He looked like a child caught in a storm, his eyes darting wildly between the masked tactical operators and the figure of the governor standing in the rain. "I didn't know," Vance screamed, his voice cracking a high-pitched wail that was swallowed by the storm. "I thought she was a drifter. Someone told me I was just following the patrol protocol. You can't do this to me. I have a family. I'm a 10-year veteran." One of the troopers shoved him, pinning him against the hood of the cruiser. "Shut your mouth, Vance," the trooper snarled. He ripped the heavy-duty service weapon from Vance's holster and threw it onto the pavement, where it skidded and disappeared into the darkness. "You aren't a veteran. You're a liability." The sound of sirens grew deafening as 3 additional state police interceptors screamed into the scene, their tires spraying mud over everything. Chief Robert Harrison, the head of the Silver Creek PD, stumbled out of his vehicle. He looked like a man who had seen his own executioner. His face was ghostly, his hands trembling so violently he had to shove them into his pockets to hide it. He saw the governor. He saw the handcuffs. He saw the tactical units. Harrison didn't approach. He couldn't. He walked forward, his legs shaking, until he was about 10 feet away. Then, in a move that silenced even the howling wind, the chief of police, a man who had spent his career ruling this town with an iron fist, stopped, squared his shoulders, and stood at rigid, trembling attention. He slowly, painfully raised his right hand to his brow in a perfect, sharp salute. It was a gesture of absolute, total capitulation. "Governor Sterling." Harrison choked out his voice, a pathetic, raspy whisper. I have no words. I am prepared to offer my resignation. My department, we are at your disposal for the internal investigation." Maya turned her head slowly, looking at him over her shoulder. Her expression was one of profound, icy detachment. She didn't acknowledge the salute. She didn't acknowledge the apology. "Chief Harrison," she said, her voice cutting through the rain like a razor, "your department hasn't been a police force for a long time. Based on the evidence we've already secured from your precinct's servers, you aren't here to offer a resignation. You're here to provide a confession." Harrison reeled back as if he had been punched. The color vanished from his face entirely. The sheer terror in his eyes confirmed it. He knew. He knew about the nightfall operations, the racial quotas, the fabricated reports, the stolen evidence. He knew his house of cards had just been burned to the ground. "Take his badge, Marcus," Maya ordered, never taking her eyes off the chief, "and notify the Attorney General that the scene is secure. We are leaving for the capital." As Thorne moved toward Harrison, the chief didn't fight. He just stood there, staring at the ground, a broken man watching his world disintegrate. Maya turned back to the road, her cuffed hands pulsing with pain, her eyes set on the horizon. The night was far from over. The motorcade tore down the rain-slicked interstate like a squadron of black steel missiles, a synchronized formation of SUVs and police interceptors cutting through the unrelenting July downpour. Inside the lead vehicle, the atmosphere was pressurized, thick, with the weight of impending political seismic shifts. Governor Maya Sterling sat in the spacious rear cabin, her posture rigid, her hands still locked behind her back. The steel cuffs had long since grown warm against her skin, but the sharp edges bit mercilessly into her swollen wrists with every bump in the road. In the front passenger seat, Agent Marcus Thorne was a blur of efficiency. He was simultaneously managing 4 different encrypted channels, his voice a low, rapid-fire drone as he relayed the sitrep to the state attorney general, the Highway Patrol Command, and his tactical team currently securing the Silver Creek precinct. "Governor," Thorne said, his voice cutting through the static of the radios. He turned slightly, his gaze drawn immediately to the strained, unnatural position of her arms. "The medical team is on standby at the executive mansion. We are 20 minutes out. I have the authority to override your directive and remove those cuffs now. You don't have to carry this burden any further." "I am not carrying a burden, Marcus," Maya replied, her voice eerily calm. She stared out the tinted window at the blurring tree line. "I am carrying the evidence of a broken system. If I take them off now, the optics change. The visceral, raw reality of what happened in that mud is lost. People need to see the bruises. They need to see the metal." Thorne nodded, his jaw ticking in silent, respectful defiance. He turned back to his console, his fingers dancing over the keys. Understood, ma'am. I've just received the preliminary data dump from the Silver Creek server raid. It's exactly as you feared. The internal file labeled Operation Nightfall is a goldmine of corruption. He tapped a command into the monitor, and the vehicle's premium sound system began to stream the audio files captured from the precinct's dispatch logs. The cabin filled with the chilling, casual voices of local officers. Target sighted at the North County line. Vance's voice echoed through the speakers. Male, early 20s, ethnic profile fits the Nightfall parameters, requesting authorization for a stop and frisk. Let's see what we can shake out of his pockets. Another voice, older and authoritative, responded. Proceed, Vance. And remember, if he doesn't have a weapon, plant a suspicious substance. We need to keep the asset seizure quotas up for the new precinct equipment. Don't leave a paper trail. Maya's eyes snapped open. The cynicism in the voices was nauseating. It wasn't just individual prejudice. It was a factory of injustice, a systematic machine designed to hunt the vulnerable for profit and statistical performance. Asset seizure. Maya whispered the words, tasting like ash. They were turning their patrol routes into a private revenue stream. It's worse, Governor, Thorne interjected, his tone dropping to a dangerous register. They weren't just running scams. They were coordinating with local municipal judges to ensure that anyone who challenged the arrests was slapped with resisting officer charges, effectively stripping them of their right to counsel. They've been creating a legal dead zone in Silver Creek for years. It's a federal Department of Justice consent decree waiting to happen. Maya leaned her head back against the leather headrest, closing her eyes to visualize the encounter. The arrogance of Vance, the casual disregard for her life, the way he had dismissed her as a target. It all made sense now. He wasn't a lone wolf. He was a product of an ecosystem that thrived in the darkness, a culture where the badge was a license to act with impunity because they believed no one was watching. Sarah is waiting for us, Thorne continued, referring to the chief of staff. She has the press gallery organized, but we have a tactical problem. The Police Benevolent Association president, Frank Moretti, is already on the morning shows. He's pushing the combative suspect narrative. He's going to try to bury the racial profiling angle under a mountain of procedural jargon. Let him talk, Maya said, her voice dropping into a register of pure executive authority. Let him weave his web. The more he defends the indefensible, the deeper he digs their grave. We don't need to spin this. We just need to show it. She looked at Thorne. I want the dashcam footage from Vance's cruiser digitized and uploaded to every major news outlet in the state. I want the audio of the Nightfall directives played at the start of tomorrow's joint session. And Marcus, get the federal DOJ on the phone. Tell them the governor is opening the gates. If they want to dismantle a corrupt precinct from the inside out, I'm giving them the roadmap. As the motorcade breached the heavy iron gates of the executive mansion, the sprawling historic estate was completely illuminated, buzzing with the chaotic energy of a disturbed anthill. News vans were already beginning to gather at the outer perimeter, tipped off by frantic chatter on police scanners. Maya stepped out of the vehicle, the rain still soaking her hoodie, her hands still painfully secured behind her back. She ignored the frantic medical staff rushing toward her with trauma kits. She ignored the gasps of her staff as they saw the raw, mottled purple welts on her wrists. She walked toward the mansion entrance, a vision of unyielding, bruised authority. The long night was ending, but the storm was just beginning. She had the data. She had the evidence. And for the first time in the history of Silver Creek, the hunters were about to become the hunted. By 7 a.m., the story had metastasized from a local precinct rumor into a national media firestorm. Satellite trucks from every major network, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, choked the avenues surrounding the state capitol. The morning air was electric, charged with speculation, fueled by the strategic, calculated leaks orchestrated by Maya's chief of staff, Sarah Jenkins. Inside the green room of a local ABC affiliate, Frank Moretti, the combative president of the State Police Benevolent Association, adjusted his tie. He looked polished, arrogant, and entirely oblivious to the fact that he was standing on the edge of a precipice. He had spent the last 3 hours on the phone with the terrified remnants of the Silver Creek PD command, piecing together a narrative designed to shield his union. He was convinced they still controlled the evidence. He had no idea that the midnight raid on the precinct server room had already stripped them of their only leverage. "We are live in 30 seconds, Frank," the floor director signaled. Moretti nodded, a predatory smirk tugging at his lips. Across the city, inside her private holding room directly behind the State House rostrum, Governor Maya Sterling sat on a folding chair. She was still wearing the mud-spattered, rain-soaked hoodie. Her hair was matted, her face was drawn, and her hands were still locked behind her back, in Derek Vance's steel cuffs. She had worn them for nearly 8 hours now. The pain had long since moved past a sharp ache into a deep, radiating numbness that crept up into her shoulders. Her wrists were a vivid, horrifying tapestry of deep purple bruises and raw, torn skin where the metal teeth had bitten into the flesh. On the wall-mounted flat screen, the broadcast began. Moretti leaned into the camera, projecting a rehearsed aura of calm authority. "George," Moretti said, his voice smooth and deceptive, "what we have here is a classic case of executive privilege overriding standard police procedure." Officer Vance was patrolling a high-crime area. He encountered an individual in heavily concealed clothing, operating an unregistered vehicle, who immediately became combative and refused lawful orders to identify herself. The officer acted strictly by the book. Nobody is above the law, not even the governor. Maya watched him, her expression unreadable. She didn't flinch. She just watched as Moretti methodically dismantled his own career with every rehearsed syllable. "Moretti is digging his own grave," Sarah said, stepping into the room, her phone pressed to her ear. She was breathless, her eyes bright with a mixture of rage and triumph. "Captain Miller just forwarded the decrypted Nightfall files to the Attorney General. It's worse than we thought, Maya. They were systematically flagging minority drivers and running civil asset forfeiture scams to fund precinct equipment. They have documented quotas racial slurs in their dispatch logs and clear evidence that they were planting evidence to meet their performance targets. Are the screens ready in the chamber?" Maya asked, her voice quiet but resonant. "Yes, ma'am. The AV team has the feed synced to the main voting boards in the House. The press gallery is packed over capacity. They are waiting for you." Maya took a deep, steadying breath, the movement flaring the pain in her shoulders. "Let's go." At exactly 9 a.m., the heavy oak doors of the House chamber swung open. The room packed with 200 state legislators, dozens of high-profile legal observers, and the national press fell into a sudden, suffocating silence. The sergeant-at-arms struck his gavel. "Mr. Speaker, the governor of the state." The chamber erupted into what began as polite anticipatory applause, legislators expecting Maya Bradley to walk out in her signature tailored suit, perhaps a bit visibly angry, ready to deliver a stern political rebuke. Instead, the applause died, as if choked. Maya walked down the center aisle. She wasn't flanked by her usual smiling political aides. She was flanked by 4 massive, heavily armed state troopers led by Agent Marcus Thorne. Her clothes were filthy, her posture was unnaturally rigid, and as she turned to ascend the steps to the podium, the entire chamber gasped. The light caught the shining steel handcuffs locked tightly behind her back. A collective stunned gasp echoed through the room. Several lawmakers physically recoiled. In the press gallery, the frantic clicking of camera shutters sounded like a swarm of locusts. High-profile civil rights attorneys leaned over the balcony, their expressions shifting from curiosity to visceral, open-mouthed outrage. Maya reached the podium. She couldn't hold her prepared notes. She couldn't grip the mahogany stand. She simply leaned forward into the cluster of microphones, her dark eyes sweeping across the sea of stunned, paralyzed faces. "Good morning," Maya said. Her voice was calm, but it carried a lethal, resonant weight that commanded total obedience. "An hour ago," she continued, "the president of the Police Benevolent Association went on national television and told you that I was combative. He told you that I was hiding in the shadows. He told you that the officer who did this to me was acting by the book." She turned her body slightly, ensuring the cameras caught the bruised, cuffed wrists. "He was right," she declared, her voice rising, bouncing off the vaulted ceiling. Officer Derek Vance was acting precisely by the book. But it wasn't the book of law. It was the book of Silver Creek's Operation Nightfall, a book that treated the citizens of this state as prey. She nodded to Sarah. Instantly, the two massive digital voting screens flanking the speaker's rostrum flickered to life. The state seal vanished, replaced by the high-definition, unvarnished dashcam footage from Vance's cruiser. The audio was pumped directly through the chamber's sound system. The room watched horrified as the digital governor pumped her gas. They watched as the cruiser aggressively boxed her in. They heard Vance's voice barking orders heavy with contempt. "A black woman in a hoodie is nothing more than a target." The legislators sat frozen. The raw, unvarnished racism playing out on the screens stripped away any political spin. When the video cut to black, the silence in the chamber was suffocating. "That is what happens in the dark," Maya said, her voice slicing through the heavy air. "That is what happens when a man is stripped of his title, stripped of his suit, and left with nothing but the color of his skin on a lonely road. I survived this encounter because I had an encrypted phone and a security detail 2 miles away. But what about the young woman coming home from a late shift? What about the father driving his daughter to the hospital?" She looked directly into the camera broadcasting to the networks. "Chief Robert Harrison initiated an illegal systemic dragnet to terrorize minority citizens. We have the data. 412 illegal stops in the last 14 months. 186 unlawful detainments. They weren't patrolling. They were hunting." In the front row of the chamber, Attorney General Robert Hayes stood up holding a thick, crimson-labeled manila folder. His face was a mask of professional fury. He turned to face the stunned legislators, his booming prosecutor's voice filling every corner of the room. "As of 8:45 a.m. this morning," Hayes announced, his voice reverberating with authority, "Chief Robert Harrison and Officer Derek Vance have been taken into custody by the state police. They are currently being processed on multiple state felony charges, including official misconduct, false imprisonment, and evidence tampering. Furthermore, my office has just offboarded this intelligence to the United States Department of Justice. Federal civil rights indictments are being drafted as we speak." Panic erupted in the back of the chamber. A lobbyist for the PBA, who had been smugly checking his phone just moments before, turned a sickly shade of white and sprinted for the exit. The narrative was dead. The union's influence had evaporated in the harsh light of the dashcam footage. Maya turned back to the microphone, her face tightening in a visible tremor of pain as the metal cuffs ground against her bone. "I didn't leave these handcuffs on for theater," she said, drawing the room's undivided attention back to the podium. "I left them on because I needed you to feel the absolute indignity, the physical and moral violation that occurs every single day in this state when power operates without accountability. You cannot look away from this. You cannot spin this. You are looking at the reality of the broken system we have allowed to fester." She took a steadying breath, her eyes locking onto those of her staunchest conservative critics. "Today, I am introducing the Executive Accountability Act. It will mandate independent civilian oversight boards with subpoena power for every municipality in this state. It will strip qualified immunity from any officer found guilty of deliberate racial profiling, and it will decertify corrupt departments outright. And we are not leaving this legislative session until it is signed into law. The chamber erupted. It wasn't the polite, measured applause of a typical session. It was a thunderous, bipartisan standing ovation. Even those who had spent years fighting Maya's policies stood up overwhelmed by the undeniable, visceral reality of the evidence and the raw, staggering power of the moment. Maya stepped back from the microphone. Agent Marcus Thorne stepped onto the rostrum, joined by the Attorney General. "It's time, Governor," Thorne whispered, his voice thick with uncharacteristic emotion. Maya nodded. Thorne retrieved the small silver key he had confiscated from the precinct's evidence locker. He stepped behind the governor. The entire chamber watched in breathless, agonizing silence as Thorne inserted the key. Click. The left cuff sprang open. Click. The right cuff followed. The heavy steel bracelets fell from Maya's wrists, clattering loudly onto the mahogany floor of the rostrum. The sound echoed through the silent chamber like a gunshot. Maya slowly brought her arms forward. The camera zoomed in relentlessly. Her wrists were a vivid, horrifying tapestry of deep purple bruises and raw, torn skin. She didn't hide them. She held them out, rubbing her forearms slowly, as the blood rushed back into her hands, causing a blinding surge of pins and needles. She looked down at the discarded handcuffs on the floor, then looked back up at the silent, watching world. "The chains are broken today," Maya said, her voice quiet, but echoing with undeniable finality. "Now we get to work." She turned and walked off the rostrum, her security detail falling in around her. She left the bloody, mud-stained handcuffs lying on the mahogany floor, a permanent physical reminder to every person in that room that true justice only comes when those in power are forced to feel the weight of the chains. The transformation was absolute. By the time Maya reached her office, the Silver Creek precinct was already being scrubbed by federal agents. The names of Harrison and Vance were being erased from the history of the town, replaced by the onset of a new federalized era of oversight. The Nightfall operation had been exposed for what it was, a dark, parasitic greed that had fed on the lives of innocent citizens. But the governor had proved that no badge was a shield against the absolute truth. True power, Maya had learned, wasn't about avoiding the harsh realities of the world. It was about having the courage to wear the chains of the oppressed, to force a broken system into the light. The bruises on her wrists would fade, but the scars left on the state's political landscape would remain as a testament to the night the governor was dragged into the mud and rose from it to dismantle an empire of injustice. True dignity is not defined by the clothes we wear or the titles we hold. It is forged in the fire of adversity. When we stand up against the darkness, we don't just win a fight, we change the course of history for everyone who comes after us. If this story of justice and resilience moved you, don't let the conversation stop here. What do you think about the power of accountability in our communities? Drop a comment below with your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life drama that proves that even in the darkest times, the truth always finds a way to shine.